The cemetery was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. Emma walked slowly between the rows of headstones, her fingers brushing the cold marble as she passed. It had been 3 months since her mother's funeral, and yet the pain was still a raw, open wound. She came here often, not just to visit her mother's grave, but to escape the suffocating silence of her empty apartment. That's when she noticed it, a small, weathered grave tucked beneath an old oak tree. The name on the stone was nearly faded, but she could just make it out. Lillian Hart, 1942 to 1998. Beloved mother. The grave looked forgotten, the grass around it overgrown, the flowers long withered. Something about it tugged at Emma's heart. Maybe it was the way the dates mirrored her own mother's life, or the way the word beloved seemed to whisper of a story untold. Without thinking, Emma knelt and began clearing the dead leaves from the base of the stone. She didn't know Lillian Hart, had never even heard the name before, but in that moment, it felt like the right thing to do. As her fingers worked, she found herself talking, softly as if afraid of being overheard. "I don't know you," she murmured, "but I think maybe you understand." The next day she returned with a fresh bouquet of white lilies, her mother's favorite, and placed them carefully on Lillian's grave. Then on impulse she pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. It was a letter, written late the night before, her messy handwriting spilling out all the things she couldn't say to anyone else. "Dear Lillian," it began, "I don't know why I'm writing to you. Maybe because your grave feels like the only place where my grief doesn't feel so alone." She tucked the note beneath the flowers and walked away, her heart pounding strangely. It was silly, she told herself. No one would ever read it, but she was wrong. Emma didn't return to the cemetery for a week. Life had pulled her back into its rhythm. Work deadlines, grocery runs, the mundane distractions that kept grief at arm's length. But the thought of that letter nagged at her. Had the wind carried it away? Had some groundskeeper tossed it into the trash? The idea that a stranger might have read her raw, unfiltered emotions made her face burn with embarrassment. Yet something drew her back. The moment she stepped onto the path leading to Lillian's grave, her breath caught. The lilies she had left were still there, slightly wilted now, but neatly arranged. And beside them, her letter. Only it wasn't alone. A second piece of paper lay beneath it, crisp and clean, as if placed there recently. Emma's hands trembled as she picked it up. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate. "To the woman who writes to Lillian," it began. Her pulse roared in her ears as she read on. "You don't know me, but I've seen you here. I come every Sunday to tend to this grave. Imagine my surprise when I found your letter. Lillian was my aunt, a woman who loved fiercely and was loved deeply in return. Your words moved me. If you'd like to know more about her, leave another note. I'll find it." The letter was signed simply, J. Emma read it 3 times, her mind spinning. Someone had been watching her. The thought should have unnerved her, but instead a strange warmth spread through her chest. This J knew Lillian. They had loved her. Suddenly, the grave wasn't just a forgotten patch of earth. It was a doorway. She sat right there on the grass, pulled out her notebook, and began to write. The letters became a ritual, a secret conversation between two strangers bound by grief and curiosity. Emma returned to the cemetery every few days, each time finding a reply from Jay, tucked beneath the flowers she now made sure to bring. Their words painted a picture of Lillian Hart, a woman with a laugh that could fill a room, a love for old jazz records, and a habit of leaving handwritten notes in unexpected places, just like Emma had done. She believed in small kindnesses, Jay wrote once. She used to say the right words always find the right person. Emma clung to that idea, wondering if somehow, in some impossible way, Lillian had guided her to this grave. But as the weeks passed, the letters grew deeper, more personal. Jay confessed that Lillian's death had left a hole in their family, one that was never properly mended. "We didn't just lose her," they wrote. "We lost each other after she was gone." Emma understood that kind of fracture all too well. Her own family had scattered after her mother's funeral, arguments over old wounds and unspoken regrets driving them further apart. She hadn't spoken to her older brother in months, and the thought of facing him made her stomach twist with guilt. One evening, under the dim glow of her apartment lamp, she poured all of it into a letter. Her loneliness, her regrets, the way grief had a way of rewriting every memory until she wasn't sure what was real anymore. When she returned to the grave the next morning, Jay's reply was waiting. But this time, it was different. The paper was thicker, the ink slightly smudged, as if written in haste. "You remind me so much of her," it read, "not just in your words, but in the way you love. Lillian had a daughter once. She lost her very young. I think she'd be glad to know someone like you is remembering her." Emma's breath caught. A daughter? That meant there had been a child, a life cut short, another layer of loss. She traced the words with her fingertips, her mind racing. Why had Jay never mentioned this before? And why did it feel like there was something more, something hovering just beyond the edges of the page? The next letter she left was simple, just 3 words. "Tell me everything." The reply did not come quickly. Days stretched into a week, and Emma found herself visiting the grave daily, her footsteps growing heavier with each trip where no new letter awaited her. Had she pushed too hard? Had Jay decided this strange correspondence had gone on long enough? The uncertainty gnawed at her, mixing with the grief she still carried like a stone in her chest. She sat beside Lillian's grave one evening, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of gold and violet, and whispered aloud, "I just want to understand." The wind rustled the leaves of the old oak above her, but there was no answer. Then on the 8th day she saw it, a single envelope, crisp and white, propped against the headstone. Her name was written on the front in the same elegant script, but this time the handwriting seemed less steady, as if the writer's hand had trembled. Inside was not just a letter, but a photograph, a black and white image of a young woman with warm eyes and a soft smile, holding a baby in her arms. Lillian and Clara, the back of the photo read, 1965. Emma's fingers traced the edges, her heart pounding. Clara, the daughter Jay had mentioned, the one who had been lost. The letter beneath it was longer than any before, the ink blotched in places. From tears, Emma realized with a jolt. Clara was only 2 when she died, Jay wrote. A fever that came on too fast, back when such things couldn't always be stopped. Lillian never recovered, not really. She kept Clara's room exactly as it was, even as the years passed. My family didn't talk about it. We didn't know how. But when I found your letters, it felt like something she would have wanted, like maybe you were meant to find her. Emma's vision blurred as she read on, Jay's words unraveling a story of love and loss that mirrored her own in ways that left her breathless. Lillian believed in signs, the letter continued. She'd leave notes for strangers, hoping they'd find the right person. Maybe this is one of hers. Emma didn't realize she was crying until a drop fell onto the paper, smudging the ink. She wiped her cheeks hastily, clutching the photograph to her chest. All this time she had thought she was the one reaching out. But what if Lillian, or fate, or something beyond understanding, had been reaching back? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. That night she wrote her longest letter yet, pouring out everything, her mother's death, the silence in her family, the way Lillian's grave had become a refuge. And at the end, she added a question that had been burning inside her for weeks. Who are you, really? The air was thick with the scent of rain when Emma returned to the cemetery the following afternoon. The sky a brooding gray that seemed to mirror the restless churn of her thoughts. She had barely slept, her mind spinning with the weight of Jay's last letter. Lillian's story, Clara's short life, the eerie parallels between their grief and her own. But it was the photograph that haunted her most. There was something in Lillian's smile, in the way she held her child, that felt achingly familiar, like a half-remembered dream. She had studied the image for hours, tracing the curve of Lillian's cheek, the delicate arch of Clara's tiny fingers, as if they might whisper their secrets if she looked hard enough. When she reached the grave, her breath caught. This time there was no letter, just a single fresh white rose laid across the stone, its petals damp with dew. Beneath it, barely visible, was a small, folded square of paper. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, the paper crisp between her fingers. "Meet me," it read, "tomorrow at sunset. The bench by the willow tree near the east gate. You deserve answers in person. It was signed for the first time with a full name, Jonathan Hart. Emma's pulse roared in her ears. Jonathan. Jay was a man, Lillian's nephew perhaps, or someone else entirely. The note offered no clues, only the quiet certainty of a voice she had come to trust through ink and paper. She tucked the rose carefully into her bag, her mind racing. Part of her wanted to run, to bury this strange chapter before it could unravel her any further. But a louder, fiercer part needed to see this through. She had to know why Lillian's grave had called to her, why Jonathan's words felt like a lifeline in the storm of her grief. That night, she dreamed of her mother, not as she was in those final, pain-riddled days, but as she'd been in Emma's childhood, vibrant, laughing, her hands dusted with flour as she baked their favorite lemon cake. Some things don't end, sweetheart, her mother whispered in the dream, pressing a warm hand to Emma's cheek. They just change shape. Emma woke with tears on her pillow, the words echoing in her chest like a promise. The next day passed in a blur. By the time the sun began its slow descent, painting the cemetery in hues of amber and lavender, Emma's nerves were frayed thin. She paused at the east gate, her eyes scanning the path ahead. There, beneath the weeping willows' trailing branches, sat a figure. A man, his shoulders slightly stooped, his hands clasped loosely in his lap. As she stepped closer, he turned, and the breath left her lungs in a rush. His eyes were Lillian's eyes. The world seemed to slow as Emma took in the man's face, the deep-set eyes that held the same quiet intensity as Lillian's in the photograph. The lines around his mouth that suggested a lifetime of smiles and sorrows intertwined. He stood as she approached, his movements deliberate, as if he too were afraid that one wrong step might shatter this fragile moment. For a long heartbeat, neither of them spoke. The wind rustled the willow leaves above them, a hushed whisper that seemed to carry the weight of all the unspoken words between them. Then softly he said, "Emma." Just her name, but it sounded like a confession. She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. Jonathan. Saying it aloud made him reel in a way the letters hadn't. His voice was deeper than she'd imagined, tinged with a rawness that mirrored her own. He gestured to the bench, and she sat, the wood cool beneath her palms. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that existed between people who had already shared secrets in the dark, who knew that some truths were too heavy for small talk. Finally, Jonathan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound journal. Its edges were worn, the cover softened with age. "I thought you should see this," he said, handing it to her. It was Lillian's. Emma's breath hitched as she opened it. The pages were filled with Lillian's handwriting, looping and elegant, so alive it was almost as if the woman herself were speaking. The entries were snippets of a life, grocery lists, recipes, hurried notes about the weather. But scattered among them were longer passages, reflections on grief and love, and the small, aching beauty of the world. And then, near the middle, she found it, a page dated just months before Lillian's death. "I dreamt of Clara last night," it began. "She was grown, with a daughter of her own. She smiled at me, and I knew, really knew, that she was all right, that we all would be." Emma's vision blurred. She blinked rapidly, but the tears came anyway, spilling over onto the page. Jonathan didn't reach for her, didn't try to fill the silence with empty comfort. He just waited, his presence steady beside her. When she could speak again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Why did you write back to me? That first time?" Jonathan looked out across the cemetery, his jaw working. "Because you were the first person in decades who saw her," he said. "Really saw her. Not just the grave, not just the name. Her." He turned back to Emma, his eyes glistening. "And because I think she led you there." Emma's chest ached. She thought of the day she'd first stumbled upon Lillian's grave, how she'd been drawn to it without understanding why, how clearing the leaves had felt like an act of devotion. "You really believe that?" Jonathan's smile was faint but sure. "I do. Just like I believe there's a reason you look so much like her." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Emma's pulse stuttered. What do you mean? Instead of answering, Jonathan reached into the journal and carefully extracted a second photograph, this one in color, faded with time. It showed a younger Lillian, her arms around a teenage girl with wild curls and a grin that took up half her face. The girl was unmistakable. She was Emma's mother. The world tilted violently as Emma stared at the photograph, her fingers trembling so badly the image blurred before her eyes. That smile, she'd know it anywhere. She'd spent her whole life watching it light up rooms, soothe her childhood fears, crinkle at the edges during bad jokes. Her mother looked so young here, so carefree with her arms wrapped around Lillian, their cheeks pressed together like they shared more than just affection, like they shared blood. The ground beneath Emma seemed to shift as the truth crashed over her in waves. Lillian wasn't just some stranger in a cemetery. She was family, and that meant Clara. Jonathan's voice came from very far away. Clara wasn't just Lillian's daughter. She was your grandmother's sister, your great aunt, which makes Lillian my great-grandmother, Emma finished, the words tasting like both a revelation and something she'd always known in her bones. The dates lined up with sudden, brutal clarity. Lillian would have been in her 50s when this photo was taken, already a grandmother herself. Her mother had never spoken of this branch of the family, never mentioned the woman whose grave Emma had been drawn to with such inexplicable force. But now she remembered, the way her mother would sometimes go quiet when old jazz played, the shoebox of letters she'd kept hidden in the back of her closet, the way she'd always insisted on visiting this very cemetery every Memorial Day, though she'd never explained why. Jonathan was watching her carefully, his weathered hands clasped between his knees. After Clara died, the family fractured. Lillian couldn't bear the reminders, and your grandmother, Clara's younger sister, couldn't bear Lillian's grief. They had a falling out when your mother was just a girl. By the time Lillian tried to mend things, he trailed off, but Emma understood. By then, the silence had become its own kind of wall. A sob built in Emma's throat as she traced her mother's face in the photograph. All those years, all those missed chances. And yet, had it really been coincidence that led her here? The way she'd felt compelled to clear those leaves, to leave that first letter? The dream she'd been having since this began, where her mother's voice sounded so clear. As if reading her thoughts, Jonathan reached into his pocket once more and produced a yellowed envelope. Lillian left this for your mother. She'd hoped to deliver it herself one day, but he swallowed hard. I think she'd want you to have it now. Emma's breath came in short gasps as she unfolded the brittle paper. The letter inside was brief, just a few lines in that same elegant hand she'd come to know so well through the journal. My dearest girl, if you're reading this, it means I waited too long to say I'm sorry. The truth is, I see Clara in you every day, in the way you laugh, in the way you love. Please know that wherever I am, I'm holding you both in my heart. Always, Lillian. The tears came then, great heaving sobs that shook Emma's entire body. Jonathan didn't try to comfort her with words, just placed a steadying hand on her shoulder as the last light of day faded around them. And in that moment, Emma felt something shift inside her, like a lock clicking open after years of rust. The grief was still there, still sharp, but it no longer felt like something she had to carry alone. When she finally looked up, the first stars were just visible through the willow branches. Jonathan helped her to her feet, and together they walked back toward Lillian's grave. No, not just Lillian's grave anymore, her great-grandmother's. Their steps were slow but certain, the weight between them now a shared thing. Emma knew there would be more questions tomorrow, about why her mother had never spoken of this, about the rest of the family Jonathan might still know, about how to stitch these broken pieces back into something whole. But for now, as she placed the letter and photograph carefully beside the headstone, she felt something she hadn't in months: peace. The wind picked up, rustling the pages of Lillian's journal where it lay open in her lap. Emma could almost imagine it was whispering what she'd somehow always known, that love didn't end with death, that stories didn't end with graves, and that sometimes the most important messages found their way home, even if it took decades. As she turned to leave, she caught Jonathan's eye and saw her own wonder reflected there. Without a word, they both knew. This wasn't an ending. It was the first page of something new. This story reminds us that our parents, in the generations before them, carry hidden depths of love, loss, and unspoken stories that shape who we are. Often we don't realize the weight of their silences until it's too late. Lillian's grave became a bridge between past and present because Emma was willing to listen. Not just to the living, but to the echoes of those who'd gone before. The truth is, our parents weren't always the strong, steady figures we knew. They were once young, heartbroken, and full of dreams they may have buried for our sake. Their unhealed wounds become our unanswered questions. Don't wait until all you have left is a headstone to ask the stories that matter. Sit with them now. Ask about the photos in old albums, the names they hesitate to mention, the traditions they can't explain. Because family isn't just the people we remember. It's the love that outlasts even death, the secrets that become legacies, and the chance to heal what was once broken. When we honor those who came before us, we don't just uncover their past, we reclaim missing pieces of ourselves. So reach out, listen, write the letters, ask the questions. One day you'll be grateful you did.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.